All right, welcome to the Imperfectly Inspirational Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bowman. We're so glad to have you tuning in as we continue our journey through the book of Ephesians. This week, we're going to be in Ephesians 5, but let's kind of go walk back to what we learned previously. So if you hadn't listened yet, or maybe it's been a little bit since you've listened, Ephesians chapter 4, Paul goes into this talking about unity in the body of Christ. We know that is very important, and he gives us practical ways to be unified together. And then he starts talking about the new life, talking about how, as we've been saved, how we should act. See, I kind of talked about how so many people want to go and say, what do I do? What do I do? I want to be saved. What do I need to do? Well, first, you need to fully understand what Christ did, which is what Paul explained in the first part of the book of Ephesians. He went through this whole elaborate explanation of what Christ did and everything that was done through that. And now we're talking about those people who are saved. Once you've became saved, accepted that into your heart, now these are things that we must do. And he gives us a big understanding. You're talking about put off your old self and to renew your minds and different things that we should do. Let no corrupt talk come from you. Let all bitterness and wrath be away from you. And this list continues on in chapter 5. And I'm going to tell you, chapter 5, we're going to make a two-part, because we're going to finish off what Paul was talking about. And then we're going to go into the second part of that, which is marriage, and I think deserves a whole episode on its own. So Ephesians chapter 5 is going to be 2 episodes. So let's go ahead and dive into the content. All right, so you know how people like to say, I am who I am, and this is me, this is what you get when you deal with me. I've heard that phrase many times, and I'm guilty of saying that too. And one thing about that is I think we all have mannerisms and we all have things about us that are just kind of uniquely us. But when it comes to character-wise or things that would go against God, I think that phrase really makes you wonder that individual's heart or where they are with their walk with God, if the things that they do counteract the Bible. And this is kind of what I want to get with on this second part of what Paul is talking about on the way we should be as Christians, because there's a lot of things in here that a lot of people still do, or they have done, or just are the way that they are, and they say that it is who they are. And I really want to say that that is false. You aren't who you are. You're either a sinner or you're saved. And if there's things that you're doing in your life that are representative of your old self, then you fully didn't change. And so I think we need to take a good look at that and take a good look at all of ourselves. And of course, as Christians, we can still fall short. We can miss the mark and have things that we need to work on. But remember, that is not you if it goes against God. Let's dive in to Ephesians 5, verse 1. It says, therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice. So first we're saying, Paul is starting off saying, hey, you got to love. We know that is one of the biggest important calls of people in the church, is to love. Love each other. As how? Christ loved us and gave himself up for us. There is always a calling. Anytime we reference, we know those old little things that we used to wear back in the day, the old bands. What would Jesus do, right? So love like Christ did. Every time you question it, go back to what did Christ do? He loved us and he gave himself up for us. And then we move on to verse 3. It says, but sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as it is proper among saints. So he's saying that there's this idea of talking about this stuff. We don't even need to talk about sexual immorality or impurity or covetousness. We could say don't do that, but it's that I'm guessing there's some gossip and there's that tendency to want to talk about, well, did you see Billy? Did you see what he did? Did you see what she did? Or do you know what they're doing down there? Let's not even talk about it. Let there be no filthiness, Lord, verse 4, let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, or crude joking, which are out of place, but instead, let there be thanksgiving. And, I'm guilty of the crude joking. Sometimes I have a sense of humor that I tend to take out of the correct context sometimes. And I've done so in situations where I shouldn't have, and I feel bad, and I've repented for that in moments. Um, and like I said before, I think we all have times where we fail, and those are times where we need to realize maybe I shouldn't be doing this. But it's telling you no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place. Things that you do in life should reflect the God inside you. But let's go on to verse 5. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral, impure, covetous, that is an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. So we see that Paul is saying, hey, remember that these people that do these things, that live in this life, they're not getting a part of heaven. They're not getting it, and God is going to put his wrath upon them. Verse 7, therefore do not become partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are the light of the world. Walk as children of the light. And I want to point this out in verse 8. Paul says, for at one time you were darkness. Now we have this tendency to say, oh, I was living in the dark. I was living in sin. No, you were darkness. You were sin. You were strife. You were that. You weren't living in it. You were that. And now, if you have came to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, you are light. You're not living in the light. You are a light. Think about that when you go forward and doing things. You're not living in a night. You're not basking just in Jesus' glory, which we know we do bask in his glory, and we're grateful to have that as part. But at the end of the day, we end up walking off as a flame that we are supposed to help light other things. We know one little flame in a dark room can show things that are hidden. So now we are not just walking in the light, we are light. So we have to shine appropriately. Verse 9, it says, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful to even speak of the things that they do in secret, but when anything is exposed by light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine upon you. And I want to go back to verse number 11. It says, take no part in the unfruitful works of the darkness. Now, does this mean that those individuals who are living in the dark, that you should have nothing to do with them? No, it doesn't say throw away the people who are living in the dark. It doesn't say have nothing to do with the people that live in the dark, right? It says, but instead expose them. Now, does this mean that you need to go up to somebody and you need to say, hey, man, I know what you're doing. I know what you did yesterday. Expose them. Call them out. No. Light exposes darkness by just being present. It exposes the thing in the dark by being present. This means that when you are around the people that are unsaved, if you shine your light, just shine your light and be the Christian you're supposed to be, act appropriately, be appropriately, it is going to shine that light on that darkness inside them. It may not shine it so that others can see sometimes, but it may shine it on their own self so they can see, wait a minute, I'm not living to this standard. There's a standard that this person's living by. And I'll tell you, so many people want to take that little part and think, okay, well, I can't have anything to do with sinners. And because so many people, they wake up and they live in their Christian world. Understand, I know a lot of people that they live in a Christian world. Everything they do is from Christian oriented from the beginning of their day to the end of the day. They are around church people. They are around, they work at a Christian organization, or maybe if it's even a Christian coffee shop. Everybody around them is all Christian, and it's easier to do things when you're in that type of atmosphere. But when you're around unsaved people all day, your light has to be really strong. And so understand that this is not saying to stay away from the unsaved. Of course, we don't want to participate in those activities, but be that light when you are around them. Does that make sense? I hope that, I'm not bashing anybody that is in a Christian-oriented theme all day, but it's it's easier to be that shining light around other Christians than it is if you're in a room full of unsaved. I know people who are Christian that work in a place where just about every single person around them is cussing up a storm, telling the dirty jokes, and Billy Bob is cheating on his wife, and so got drunk last night and fell in the gutter. You know, that's what they're around, and it is harder to be a light in those circumstances, and that's kind of, I think, what Paul is trying to give us an idea for in this part of the text is saying, hey, don't take any part in the unfruitful works of the darkness, but expose them by being the light. When you shine your light, you're going to show those things that are hidden in the dark. But anyways, let's go down to verse 15. It says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is, and do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, and singing and making a melody to the Lord with all your heart, giving thanks always and for everything to God the Father and Jesus Christ. Listen, there's one more verse we're going to get to in a minute, but Paul is summarizing all of this stuff. Now, hey, when you're out there, make the best use of your time. Don't be a slumberer. You go back in the book of Proverbs, and there's a thing about being slumberous, or taking a slumber. The guy whose arms are folded, his house is falling apart, his vineyard is falling apart. Be wise and use the time wisely in your life. Don't go out there and do the things that God tells you not to do. Don't waste your mind. That's, he's getting with, don't get drunk with wine, for that's debauchery. Anything that is taking your mind off of God or taking your ability to fully focus, saying stay away from that. And addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Basically, hey, let's lift each other up and let's go to God and be thankful. This last part, though, we go down to 21. It says, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. I think that's a two-part. I've listened to a bunch of different commentary, and you got two parts to this. You have in a military style ranking, you would have a general, you would have a private, and it goes down, or up. Same thing in the Christian hierarchy. There's the pastor, there's an overseer, there's an elder, there's, many people have different names for different titles within the church, and you should be respectful of those and submit unto those leaders because God has appointed them. Now, of course, if there is anything ungodly, we need to take that up in the correct matter. But generally speaking, if they're going, by the word of God and leading a godly life, we need to submit to those people in authority within the Christian realm, just like anybody else would submit. Just like you submit to your boss. You may not like your boss, you may not agree with your boss on everything, but you follow their lead because that's who they are. Same thing with the pastors. But ultimately, there's another end to this. It's easy. I gave the military term earlier of a private and a general. It's easy if you have a room full of privates to say, okay, the general's here, submit to this general. But when you look at the other privates in the room and you say, okay, privates, there's no general in here, so you need to submit to one another. That's kind of hard to do. So it's, that's also another fact of that we need to submit to each other. We need to be willing to give up our own selves to help somebody else and submit and take leadership. If we see somebody that has, an idea that's better, lift up each other and work together. It's not saying one is better than another. It's just saying in any circumstance, there's always a place to humble yourself, per se. And that we should have that type of reverence for each other to work together. Because that's really the only way that we're going to build this kingdom and having a solid fixture on this earth is if we do it according to the way that God says. And one of those ways is humbling ourselves amongst each other. So, wrapping this up, we see that Paul is giving us a long list from, last week when we talked into this week. We got this long list of things that now we are to do or not to do when it is as Christians. And as I gave the example at the beginning of somebody saying, well, this is who I am. This is, just me. That's just the way I do. Well, it's wrong. I want to give you a quote here by Charles Spurgeon. It says, the grace that does not change my life does not save my soul. So if you've been saved and your soul is not changed, or if you've been saved in a situation and nothing has changed about you, then obviously your soul is not changed, because that grace that God gives to you and that freedom and that mercy that God gives changes your body. It changes everything about you. It makes you want to do better. It doesn't say you're going to do better right away, but it makes you not want these things. It makes you to want to change. And that is the calling that we are to be. We're called to have that change, to reflect that change, and to live a life according to the way Christ wants us to live. Now, listen, next week we are going to tackle the rest of this. We're going to be talking about marriage. So be ready to come in, guys. I'll give you a heads up. It's brutal toward us. It is brutal when it comes to us guys. So be prepared next week to listen to marriage. But anyways, folks, go out there. Let's love one another. I love each and every one of you, and I hope y'all have a wonderful week.